Thank you. Thank you very much.
Convenient roadie.
Well, it looks like we should get started here. It's nice to see everybody this morning. Thank you for being here. My name's Andy Fillmore. I'm the candidate for Member of Parliament here in Halifax. It's wonderful to welcome everyone to my hometown and to be here with my dear friends Daryl Sampson and Bernadette Jordan, Dominic, LeBlanc, and of course Justin Trudeau. And I also want to say a big thanks to CEO of Discovery Centre, Dov Burkovicki, and his remarkable team for hosting us all at the Discovery Centre today. Now, in 2015, I ran on a simple promise: to be a champion for Halifax. And after a decade of chronic underinvestment in our community prior to that, and in communities across the country, I wanted to be part of a party and part of a government that saw the power of communities to propel Canada forward for everybody. And I became the first and only city planner ever elected to the House of Commons. Now, in the last 6 years, our party has reinvented the relationship between the federal government and local communities, including here in Halifax. We saw the potential in investing in infrastructure to create jobs and build stronger, healthier neighborhoods, in supporting public transit and active transportation to get people where they're going faster and more equitably and with reduced emissions. We heard the call from coastal communities like Halifax to fight climate change and protect our oceans and coasts. And we worked to build a Canada that's more inclusive, where we give help to those who need it most first. And in this election, we continue down that path and build on the progress we've made. Voters can elect a party that experts say has the best plan for climate change, for childcare, for housing, and for fiscal responsibility. And yes, the only party that stands a chance at preventing a federal conservative government that would take us backward. This is the team that will move Canada forward for everyone. And with that, I'd like to introduce my friend, Bernadette Jordan, the Liberal candidate for South Shore St. Margaret's. Thank you.
Thank you, Andy. Well, good morning, everyone. It is great to be here with all of you. Thank you to the Discovery Centre for hosting us here this morning. I would also first like to acknowledge that we're in Chibuktuk, the traditional and unceded territory of the Mi'kmaq people. And I want to thank Andy for all the great work he's done in Halifax. I, like him, have been out campaigning a lot in the last few weeks, putting a lot of steps on and wearing out some shoes. But what we're hearing about at the doors is very similar: climate change, childcare, health care, affordable housing, seniors. It doesn't matter where you live in Nova Scotia, these are our top issues, and the Liberal Party is the only party with a plan that's actually going to take us forward. I'm extremely proud to be a candidate under this leadership, and I'm looking forward to hearing what Justin Trudeau has to say today. But right now I'd like to turn it over to Dominic LeBlanc. Thank you.
Merci beaucoup, Bernadette. Monsieur le Premier ministre, bienvenue dans les Maritimes. Moi, je suis aussi énormément heureux d'accueillir mon chef, le Premier ministre du Canada, Justin Trudeau, en Atlantique. J'ai eu le privilège de travailler avec M. Trudeau et nos collègues au fil des derniers mois, à travailler avec les provinces sur les questions, les enjeux qui sont importants pour les Canadiens. Les soins de santé, comme Bernadette a dit, le logement abordable, une lutte commune contre les changements climatiques. And I've had a front row seat in this government's effort to work with provinces and territories across the country on issues that matter to Canadians most. Obviously, the fight against COVID, healthcare. Our government has successfully and effectively worked with provinces and territories in the interest of protecting and supporting Canadians. We've done the same thing on housing, affordability issues. We've done the same thing also in terms of the fight against climate change. So I'm very enthusiastic about the results that we'll see from Atlantic Canada next Monday. And Prime Minister, I'm very happy to see you again in the Maritimes.
Merci Dominic. Quel plaisir d'être de retour à Halifax avec vous ce matin. An incredible pleasure to be here with some of our strong Atlantic Canada team. Dominic LeBlanc, of course, over from New Brunswick, but Daryl Sampson, Bernadette Jordan, and Andy Fillmore, our local candidate and MP. This is the team that has been standing up for Canadians throughout this pandemic, throughout these past years as we've built and served and supported Canadians when things were most needed. I'm really happy as well to be in this Discovery Center. I visited many times with my kids when it was in its other location, and I can't wait to come see what federal investments and partnerships with the community have been able to lead to in this great new space. This is the kind of teaching and educating about science that we need to do, because we know that if this pandemic has taught us anything, it's listening to experts, listening to science, understanding how to move forward, yes, on ending this pandemic, but also on the fight against climate change, of how to create stronger communities and societies. We need to have real plans based in data and expert advice, and that's exactly what we're moving forward on. The reality is this pandemic highlighted that we need to do more on healthcare. That right across the country, as we were facing this health pandemic, we needed to be there to support provinces and territories, and we did. From the very beginning, we made a simple promise that we'd have your backs, and that involved investing about $8 out of every $10 in support for Canadians across this pandemic coming from the federal government, including historic and record transfers into healthcare to make sure we could support people through this. But one thing that is extremely obvious is we need to do more. That's why our Liberal platform presents a plan to hire thousands of more doctors and nurses so families across the country can have access to primary care physicians and teams. People need family doctors. We also know that there's been a backlog accumulating over the years that has been exacerbated by this pandemic. So we're investing massively to end that backlog and shorten wait times. And we also recognize, as we have for many years, that mental health issues have been increasing and again exacerbated by this pandemic, which is why we're going to be investing massively in supports for mental health, including 1,200 counselors for colleges and universities, because we know that helping young people around with their mental health in a timely, immediate way sets them on a better path for their entire life. We learned from this pandemic, and we're stepping up with close to $25 billion over the next 5 years in healthcare, which is 5 times as much as Mr. O'Toole is spending over the next 5 years. Indeed, we see that they are not understanding the urgency of things over on the Conservative side, because they're not spending on healthcare in the coming years. Just to put it in perspective, we are spending more in the first year on eliminating the backlog than they are spending entirely over the first 5 years on everything from transfers to mental health to everything else. As your Premier Houston has said many times here in Nova Scotia, healthcare is a priority for Atlantic Canadians, and we will be there. We will be there to support the healthcare frontline workers who've been heroes through this pandemic. I had many opportunities to chat with them over the past number of months here in Atlantic Canada, and I know they deserve and need our support. And when I think of our frontline health workers, I can't help but think as well about the long-term care workers. Places like Northwood here that had difficult times, but also had extraordinary teams of staff stepping up to support their most vulnerable seniors. And that's why we have a concrete plan that involves hiring 50,000 new personal support workers across the country and ensuring that personal support workers are paid at least $25 an hour. Because we know, and we learned, unfortunately, through these challenges, that conditions of work are what dictate conditions of care for vulnerable seniors. That's why we're stepping up. The contrast, of course, is that we saw last night Jagmeet Singh and the NDP like to say nice things about what they do, but don't actually have a plan. He has no idea how he can actually deliver for protecting our seniors. Well, after the year we've been through, Canadians deserve a team with not just a vision and ambition, but a concrete plan to deliver, and that's what we have. Especially because we're the ones who are positioned to stop Erin O'Toole and the Conservatives from taking Canada back. On healthcare, not only is he underinvesting, But he said very clearly a number of times that he thinks there is a need to bring in more private, for-profit health care into our country, which of course would allow the wealthiest to jump ahead of the waiting lines and lower the level of care for everyone else. That's not what we needed. That's not the lesson that should be drawn from this pandemic. But the Conservatives seem to be putting forward the wrong choices on a whole bunch of things. Quand vient à la grande priorité pour tout le monde, celle qu'il faut adresser d'abord pour pouvoir faire toutes les autres choses, d'en finir avec la pandémie pour de bon, il n'est pas en train de faire ce qu'on doit faire. We talked about listening to science. Well, we know that to end this pandemic for good, we have to get people vaccinated. And Aaron O'Toole can't even ensure that 90% of his candidates are vaccinated. How is he going to get 90% of Canadians vaccinated? That's something he has direct control over. But he won't, and he can't. Why? Well, we've seen why. Because he's there to back up candidates like his candidate in Peterborough, who thinks it's okay to go visiting seniors' homes without being fully vaccinated. Or his candidate in southern Manitoba, Ted Falk, who is pushing anti-vaxxer misinformation. That's not leadership by the Conservatives. That's giving in to those people who are putting us all at risk. We need to get vaccinated to get through this. That's what I say every single day. And if you have been vaccinated and you know people who haven't, make sure you talk to them so they get vaccinated. We have enough vaccines in this country for everyone, months ahead of schedule. To get through this pandemic, to get back to the things we love, everyone needs to get vaccinated, and we are the only party with the plan and the clarity of leadership that'll get that done. Mr. O'Toole, he's not leading. He's misleading, whether it's on bringing back the assault weapons that we made illegal a year ago, whether it's on canceling the child care agreements we signed with the provinces, including right here in Nova Scotia, where Premier Houston said, we can't afford to go backwards on child care. We need to make sure that families across this country have access to $10 a day child care in the coming years, with child care fees cut in half in the very next year. These are things that are going to make a huge difference for families, things that Mr. O'Toole doesn't understand. It's not just about creating opportunities for families. It's also opportunities for businesses and economic growth as more women get into the workforce, the way Quebec has demonstrated over the past 25 years. That's the way we need to move forward. And can't be in a place like the Discovery Centre without talking about climate change. The greatest challenge we're facing as a world right now for the coming decades. Science is very clear. We need to step up our ambition and our concrete plans to fight climate change. And you can't say, as I agree with the NDP on, that science should dictate, experts should dictate our urgency on climate change, and then turn around and present a climate plan like the NDP has that doesn't cut it. The experts, the scientists have said that the NDP's plan on climate change is a failure, whereas the plan that this Liberal government has put forward, our Liberal platform, is both ambitious and concrete and meets the challenge in a way that supports families, creates jobs, and protects our environment for future generations. Because the contrast is clear with Mr. O'Toole, who wants to go back to Mr. Harper's targets, even though we've already set more ambitious targets within the Paris Agreement. Even though we're on track to largely passing Mr. Harper's targets already, he wants to bring us back to that. And people know here in Atlantic Canada and across the country that you don't have a plan for the economy if you don't have a plan for the environment. Le choix est extrêmement clair dans cette élection. Est-ce qu'on continue d'avancer? Est-ce qu'on continue d'être là, les uns pour les autres, en tant que Canadiens? Ou est-ce qu'on revient en arrière? Moi, je sais que les gens ici en Nouvelle-Écosse et à travers le pays veulent continuer d'avancer pour tout le monde. We know that the choice is clear in this election. Do we continue to move forward with a government that has your back, that has ambitious and concrete plans to address the big things that are preoccupying families, from ending this pandemic to fighting climate change to supporting families to moving forward on countering the housing pressures that so many people are facing with real investments in affordable housing and housing affordability? Do we move forward for everyone, or do we let the Conservatives take Canada back? I know what Atlantic Canadians want to do, and that's move forward together. Merci beaucoup.
Thank you, Mr. Trudeau. We'll now start the question period, 20 minutes, starting with Raymond Fillon from TVA Nouvelle.
Oui, bonjour, M. Trudeau. Je pouvais vous demander de garder vos réponses courtes puisque le temps de questions des médias est restreint par votre équipe. Vous êtes présenté en 2015 comme un champion de l'unité nationale. Or, il y a un sondage aujourd'hui qui indique que le pays est fracturé, que le fossé s'élargit entre le Québec et le reste du Canada, entre autres sur des questions de langue. Êtes-vous, un, préoccupé par ça, et deux, qu'est-ce que vous répondez aux gens qui voient un échec de votre leadership en matière d'unité nationale?
Ce qu'on a pu faire au cours des 6 dernières années, ça a été de défendre le français et les langues officielles au pays, à travers le pays. On a fait des investissements records dans les communautés de langue officielle minoritaire à travers le pays. On a été là pour investir dans leurs organismes, on a été là pour appuyer leurs droits et on va continuer de le faire, y compris à défendre le français au Québec. C'est un changement qu'on a pris parce qu'on reconnaît que le français est menacé et nous allons être là pour ça. Et je pense que ce qu'on a vu pendant cette pandémie, Ray, c'est que les Canadiens ont été là les uns pour les autres. On a passé à travers parce que les gens sont plus unis, sont plus présents, sont plus prêts à s'aider les uns les autres. Je reconnais qu'il y a une petite minorité qui s'enlève et qui se met à part du consensus sur la vaccination, sur les changements climatiques, sur les droits des femmes. Mais cette petite minorité-là ne représente pas les Canadiens, même si elle est la bienvenue dans le Parti conservateur de Erin O'Toole.
Prochaine question.
Mais qu'en est-il de l'unité nationale? Et il y a aussi l'Assemblée nationale qui réclame des excuses formelles des organisateurs du débat en anglais pour ce qu'elle appelle le procès hostile intenté contre la nation québécoise jeudi dernier. En tant que Québécois, est-ce que vous réclamez, vous aussi, des excuses?
Oui, je trouve que la prémisse de la question était inacceptable et je pense que ce serait important que le consortium s'explique et s'excuse. Les Québécois ne sont pas racistes. Nous allons toujours être là pour, oui, travailler ensemble pour améliorer notre pays et lutter contre la discrimination où elle existe, mais faire des déclarations comme a été incluse dans cette question, c'est pas utile pour le pays et c'est insultant pour les Québécois. Okay. As I've said before, I think the premise of the question was wrong and, quite frankly, insulting to Quebecers. We know there is lots of work to do across the country to fight against systemic discrimination, to stand up against intolerance, but Quebecers are not racist. And yes, I think the consortium should be explaining itself and excusing itself and asking for and making an apology.
Prochaine question.
Bonjour, Louis Blouin de Radio-Canada. Vous avez intensifié votre appel au vote stratégique. Vous essayez de rallier dans votre camp les électeurs progressistes. Or, M. Singh, lui, dit ce matin que le Parti libéral n'a jamais été aussi près dans ses valeurs que celles du Parti conservateur. Vous lui répondez quoi, M. Singh?
Je pense que c'est du cynisme profond de la part de M. Singh de prétendre qu'il n'y a aucune différence entre un gouvernement libéral et un gouvernement conservateur. On le sait que, pour sa part, il dit qu'il pourrait très bien travailler avec un gouvernement conservateur élu, mais pas moi. Moi, je trouve que ce qu'on est en train de faire et ce qu'on a fait depuis 6 ans pour amener un prix sur la pollution à travers le pays, pour lutter de façon encore plus ambitieuse contre les changements climatiques, à aider les familles à sortir 1 million de Canadiens de la pauvreté tout en créant 1 million d'emplois, c'est pas rien. De lutter côte à côte avec les peuples autochtones pour une meilleure réconciliation, de livrer la fin d'ébullition d'eau, des nouvelles écoles pour les peuples autochtones. Parlez-en aux Canadiens si la lutte contre les armes à feu, encore plus renforcée, a fait une différence pendant les derniers 6 ans. Parlez-en de notre leadership en termes de garderie, en termes d'allocation canadienne aux enfants. C'est du cynisme profond de M. Singh de vouloir dire qu'il n'y a aucune différence. Qu'au contraire, les Canadiens savent très bien ce que ça coûterait de revenir en arrière à l'ère de Stephen Harper. Et je pense que M. Singh vient juste de rendre le choix encore plus clair. Peut-être qu'avec son piètre plan sur les changements climatiques, il trouverait qu'il pourrait très bien travailler pour lutter contre les changements climatiques avec M. O'Toole, mais pas nous. Parce que nous avons besoin d'être encore plus ambitieux et concrets, et c'est pour ça qu'on écoute la science. Okay. I think it is cynical of Mr. Singh to continue to pretend that there is no difference between a conservative government and a liberal government. I understand that he's open to working with a conservative minority government. Perhaps that highlights and underscores the fact that he doesn't have a real plan to fight climate change, and he'd be perfectly happy with Mr. O'Toole's plan. But we're not. And I think Canadians know that over the past 6 years, there was a massive difference in what we were able to deliver when we turned the page on 10 years of conservative governments, whether it's stepping up with a price on pollution across the country that we fought conservative premiers on all the way to the Supreme Court and won, whether it's moving forward on reconciliation that's put tens of thousands of kids in new classrooms in schools that we've built and refurbished, on ending boil water advisories, on getting kids in care to remain in their communities, as we did in Cowessess, instead of putting them in the provincial system. The choices we have made over these past 6 years have transformed for the better the lives of millions of Canadians as we lifted 1 million people out of poverty at the same time as we created 1 million jobs. Mr. Singh can pretend that the Conservatives might have been just as good in this pandemic as we have, even as they were calling to cut benefits for people, cut benefits for the most vulnerable. We were there to support people. We had your back through this pandemic, and we have your backs as we build a better future. So I think Canadians see that the choice is very, very clear. Do we go back with the Conservatives, or do we choose to move forward for everyone with the Liberals?
Rapidement, M. Trudeau, il y a un groupe d'interprètes afghans arrivé au Canada il y a quelques années qui décide de lancer une grève de la faim parce qu'ils veulent que leurs proches soient rapatriés le plus rapidement possible. Qu'est-ce que vous avez à dire à ces gens-là spécifiquement?
Je comprends leurs préoccupations. Ils sont arrivés dans les années Harper, quand les règles étaient extrêmement restrictives pour leur famille élargie. Et je sais que nous sommes en train de travailler avec eux pour justement s'assurer que les membres de leur famille élargie soient parmi ces 40 000 Afghans que nous avons hâte d'accueillir au Canada dans tous les coins du pays parce que les Canadiens sont là pour eux. Je sais qu'on est en train de travailler avec eux justement pour les rassurer que oui, nous voulons amener leurs familles qui sont à risque ici au Canada.
Next question.
Good morning, Mr. Trudeau. Steve Scheer with Reuters. StatsCan reported this morning inflation hit its highest level in 18 years in August. Aaron O'Toole commented, the numbers released today make it clear that under Justin Trudeau, Canadians are experiencing an affordability crisis. It's troubling that Justin Trudeau seems to not care about the skyrocketing cost of living that is being imposed on Canadians through inflation. My question is, how do you justify spending tens of billions of dollars more that's in your platform when inflation is already spiking?
I think a couple of things. First of all, I would never pretend that Aaron O'Toole doesn't care about people. I'm not going to go on a personal attack like that. I'm going to stay focused on the policy differences and the choices that Mr. O'Toole has made that I think won't help Canadians. But I'm not going to get into personal attacks as he continues to do. On inflation, first of all, let's recognize that our country and our world is bouncing back, coming roaring back in Canada's place from an extreme crisis of this pandemic that has caused a lot of disruption and, yes, is increasing prices. And we recognize that families are concerned about affordability. But that's exactly why our focus has been on being there to support families, because making sure that small businesses and families and workers and seniors are supported through this pandemic and into the future is the best way to ensure a strong economic recovery. And that is a point on which I disagree with Mr. O'Toole. What we're putting forward in our platform right now is a housing plan that's going to help to the tune of tens of thousands of dollars young families afford a home, even as we invest with municipalities billions of dollars to create new supply and protect people's rights. A child care program that brings costs down to $10 a day, cutting them in half by the next year, which means that families will be able to save tens of thousands of dollars, more than the Conservative plan, which doesn't create any spaces, and supporting in their cost of living. Everything we're doing is about creating affordability and opportunities for Canadians, whereas Mr. O'Toole, on his housing plan, is to give a $500 million tax break to wealthy landlords. His child care plan is a tax break that doesn't create any spaces. We know families need help, but families know, just like they saw with the Canada Child Benefit, that we are there to the tune of hundreds of dollars a month tax-free to support those families. We will continue to grow the economy and support them with affordability.
Next question.
Hi, Ashley Burke, CBC News, and we have limited time today, we're told. So, Hazel McCallion was at your rally last night, and she said that, you know, she doesn't agree with your decision to call an election during the pandemic, and also that she's hearing that from a lot of people. You know, we're almost a week away from the election, or we're less than that. What does it say to you that you're still having to explain why you called this election in the first place?
When I sat down with Hazel before this, the event last night, she brought that up, and I talked to her about how important it is that Canadians get a choice right now. And even after that, Hazel, of course, will always have her strong perspectives, and that's why we love her. And she came out and gave us a full-hearted, strong endorsement. And she knows about serving communities. She knows about building a better future. And she has said clearly that our choice is important as Canadians, moving forward with the Liberal Party to end this pandemic, to grow the economy, to support people, is the best choice for Canadians. And I'm deeply touched that she would be endorsing us so strongly. At the same time, I know Canadians are seeing that there is a clear choice about how we end this pandemic and how we move forward. And that contrast, not just between us and the Conservatives, but with all parties, is why people need to be making a choice now. Because the decisions that their government makes in the coming weeks, not a year from now, not 2 years from now, but in the coming weeks, will dictate not just how we end this pandemic, for example, through vaccinations, but will dictate how we move forward as a country in the coming years and even decades.
Next question.
Good morning, Christy Kirkup with the Globe and Mail. I know your team has made it clear that last night you followed public health guidelines in Brampton when you packed 400 people in a room. But I want to ask you, what message does it send during a fourth wave of a pandemic that has killed more than 27,000 Canadians to pack people in a room like that? How is that delivering a message that you're going to end the pandemic?
First of all, we followed all public health guidelines around capacity, around people in the room, because we do need to follow those public health guidelines as we get through this. At the same time, we need to recognize that close to 80% of Canadians have done the right thing, gotten themselves vaccinated, those who are eligible. And that means that for those people, being able to come back to doing the things we love is more and more of a possibility. And yes, we are seeing a fourth wave of people who chose not to get vaccinated, of people who haven't been there for their neighbors and are now putting at risk the recovery that we're having right across this country, not just from the pandemic, but our economic recovery. And that's why it is so inconceivable to me that Aaron O'Toole can't even get his candidates vaccinated, is supporting his candidates who are anti-vaxxers, like Ted Falk, who deliberately put out disinformation, false information on the dangers of vaccines to his constituents. That's not the way we move forward. We need to respect public health guidelines. We need to get people vaccinated. We need to end this so that those who are doing the right things here in Atlantic Canada and across the country don't have to face further lockdowns or further restrictions just as we're trying to get our economy going again.
But respectfully, you had no way of measuring who in that room last night was vaccinated, and there were seniors there, including 100-year-old Hazel McCallion and 87-year-old Jean Chrétien. Why would you do that?
First of all, nobody tells Hazel McCallion or Jean Chrétien what to do or what not to do. I was so glad they chose to come join us in that event, which followed all public health guidelines. But we do need to continue to ensure that we're keeping people safe, and that means getting people vaccinated, making sure that we're supporting families and workers and businesses who are doing the right things, making sure that everyone on a plane, a train, gets vaccinated, making sure that as we support provinces that move forward on proof of vaccination certificates, we're footing the bill so that people who are vaccinated, who did the right things, don't put themselves at risk from those who've chosen not to be there for them. And on that, the choice between Mr. O'Toole and his Conservatives' big tent party, which includes anti-vaxxers, versus us that are focused on science and following the rules, couldn't be clearer. Okay. Tout d'abord, il n'y a personne qui dit à M. Chrétien ou à Hazel McCallion quoi faire ou ne pas faire, et j'étais très, très content qu'ils choisissent de se joindre à nous pour m'endosser, pour nous encourager, pour encourager les Canadiens à faire le bon choix. Mais nous devons de continuer d'assurer que les gens font les bonnes choses. Et ça veut tout d'abord dire de se faire vacciner. Malheureusement, M. O'Toole n'est pas en train de démontrer le leadership nécessaire parce qu'il n'exige pas que ses candidats soient vaccinés. Il n'est pas en train de sanctionner ni sa candidate qui a visité des centres d'âge d'or sans être pleinement vacciné, ni son candidat dans le sud du Manitoba qui est en train d'avancer des propos anti-vax et de la désinformation pour ses concitoyens. C'est tout à fait irresponsable et ça rend très clair le choix pour les Canadiens. Est-ce qu'on en finit avec cette pandémie en suivant la science avec le plan libéral? Ou est-ce qu'on retourne en arrière, on laisse de la place pour les anti-vax dans un gouvernement conservateur? Ça, je le sais, les Canadiens veulent en finir et veulent avancer.
Prochaine question.
Bonjour, M. Trudeau. Je veux juste insister là-dessus. Personnellement, hier, j'aurais pas été très à l'aise de voir mes grands-parents qui ont l'âge de M. Chrétien, qui sont aussi jeunes d'esprit, mais être dans cette salle où la distanciation sociale, encore une fois, n'était pas respectée du tout. Alors, comment est-ce que vous avez pu penser que c'était une bonne idée, finalement, d'avoir M. Chrétien et Mme McCallion?
Bien, tout d'abord, j'ai été très, très content que ces deux leaders choisissent de nous appuyer, choisissent d'être là pour démontrer à quel point ils croient que le choix auquel les Canadiens font face est importante. Parce qu'on le sait, la seule façon qu'on passe à travers de cette pandémie, c'est avec la vaccination. C'est en s'assurant que les gens suivent les règles de santé publique. Et contrairement à M. O'Toole, qui laisse bien de la place dans son parti, dans ses propos et dans ses politiques pour ceux qui refusent de faire ce qui est nécessaire pour se protéger les uns les autres, pour faire passer le Canada au-delà de cette pandémie, nous sommes sans équivoque sur notre désir d'assurer la vaccination du plus grand nombre de Canadiens possible et de protéger ceux qui ont fait les bons choix.
Prochaine question.
Abigail Beeman, Global News. Mr. Trudeau, you say that you support women in the Canadian Armed Forces and that you're a feminist government, but to date you have refused to commit to an independent watchdog that reports to Parliament or any kind of public commission to look into sexual misconduct. Your government promised an external review of the allegations against General Vance, which never took place. You also promised that military police would turn sexual assault cases over to civilian police after the recommendations of former Supreme Court Justice Fish's report, but that's not happening. Victims have said over and over they don't trust the military to investigate itself. They want to know, if you are re-elected, will you commit to a watchdog that reports to Parliament or a public commission?
First of all, let me reiterate that anyone who serves in the armed forces deserves to be in an environment free from harassment or misogyny or discrimination, and we have work to do. to change the culture and the approach of the Canadian Armed Forces so that it is worthy of the extraordinary women and men who choose to serve. It is not right that women in particular in our armed forces continue to feel like they can't come forward, that they don't trust the systems around them to support them. That's wrong. That's something we've been tackling over the past years. But yes, we need to do more. We need to go further, which is why we appointed Lieutenant General Jenny Carignan to head up the unit within the armed forces that provides support and resources to anyone who wants to come forward and ensures consequences, but also why we've tasked Justice Louise Arbour to oversee all the different approaches to make sure that the choice on how we bring in independent oversight, how we take investigative powers outside of the military are all done in exactly the right way. It has gone on far too long, and all the different efforts over the years have improved, but not nearly enough, which is why we needed the top experts to say, this is what we'll do, and we commit absolutely to following full-heartedly on the recommendations that Madame Carignan, General Carignan, but especially Justice Arbour put forward to end discrimination within the military once and for all.
On another topic, we seem to be seeing more hate, more vandalism along the campaign trail, and now this latest example of your candidate, Marc Sauret, who was physically assaulted. I'm wondering if you are sending a message to candidates and volunteers to step up safety or security considerations.
Absolutely. People need to be safe. People need to feel safe in Canada. And over the past years, unfortunately, we've seen a rise in intolerance and acts of hatred, not just in a political context, but across the country. That is why we need to continue to be unequivocal about standing up against hatred and discrimination, as we have as a government, as we need to continue to. There's not a debate around vaccines. There's not a debate around climate change. We know for the safety of Canadians and future generations, we need to step up. It is unacceptable that there continue to be acts of racism and intolerance in communities across the country, whether it's political or not. We need to do more, which is why we're going to be moving forward on stronger controls over online hate and harms, while respecting freedom of speech. But you don't have the freedom to hate. You don't have the freedom to incite to violence. And our government that has taken many steps on this will continue to, because no one should feel unsafe, particularly not someone who's coming out to volunteer and support in a political campaign to make this country even better.
Thank you very much. This is what ends today's press conference.
Do you think we can try one more? Just for...
Le temps, we're already over time. Thank you.
If you'd like to stay, sir, I'll ask you a question.
Go ahead with one question.
That's fine. So, listen, there's a class action lawsuit now that's been filed. The lead plaintiffs are 2 First Nations women for $25 million, seeking damages for systemic racism faced by Indigenous employees within the federal civil service. You know, this is not the first time we've heard accusations of these kinds in this federal civil service. I know that you just gave a long answer about these problems within the military. What more can be done, really? Should there be independent studies done, commissions? I mean, I think that employees, like you say, deserve a safe space, but they're not seeing action on this file. So what can be done concretely right away?
We were the first government to recognize systemic discrimination in all our institutions across this country, including the federal government, which is one of the reasons why on appointments, on investments, on support for racialized, minority, and Indigenous employees, we've increased supports. We've created opportunities. We've created pathways into it. We've created more resources. We've brought in mechanisms for better reporting of discrimination or examples of unfair practices. But yes, there's always more to do, and we will continue to work together to recognize the challenges that exist right now within our systems and always work to improve them. Merci beaucoup tout le monde.